starting with the AC60, this is a 600 watt pure sine wave inverter that can output up to 600 watts on a continuous basis. You have DC and AC outputs. This is your AC outputs. These are your DC outputs. Over here on the side, this is your solar input, and that runs at 12 volts all the way up to 28 volts at 8 amps. That's your max of input that you could put on solar. So that 200 watt solar panel right up there is a perfect match for the AC60. This is IP65 rated, so you can get it wet. You can get it in a dust environment and you'll be safe to use it. It is expandable with expandable batteries, and here's the 2 ports for that. So you could spray water right into that port right there, and even on this port right there, and you're going to be completely fine. And there is a light on the back that you could turn on by hitting that button there, and you have different settings that you can set it to. So you could have it off. This is like medium. This is really bright. And then you have the SOS. It does have a charging output on the top of the unit at 15 watts. You have one of those, so you can set your phone up there and get it charged up without having to plug it in to a port over here, to a USB. I don't really use these that often, but I know a lot of people like that, so I did want to point that out. It does have a carrying handle that makes it easy to pack around. This is fairly light, weighing in right at 21 pounds. And I should mention that this does have 403 watt hours of battery capacity and is expandable up to like 2,000 watt hours. And on the higher quality power stations, you'll see that these are kind of like a silicone type of foot, so it keeps it from sliding around. So if I turn this around, I can kind of just push this around. I can even lift the table in an angle, so we got a pretty good angle there, and it's not sliding off of this really slick table. It doesn't slide off. So that's a good plus to have those type of feet, because if you put this on a tailgate, say on a board or something to make everything flat, and you're sitting on a hill on a slope, that's not going to slide around and just fall off the tailgate real easy. So I like that they did that. And something else you don't see on a lot of these smaller power stations is this dedicated ground. So I love that they put this in there on even the smaller power stations, and a lot of the other companies do not offer that. With these covers that are on these electrical sockets, this could get wet at IP65. Now, you cannot submerge this into water, but you can spray water directly into these ports and all over this unit, as long as you have these covers back in place like they're supposed to be, and these right here as well, and you're never going to damage the unit. I'm going to take this outside and show you that I'm not scared to put water on it, because this has got the same build as the 240, and I've let this sit out in the rain and sprayed this probably a good 24 times and never had any problems out of it. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this one. And another good example is that you could use this on a construction zone, say like in the mud here, and if it gets dirty, and let's get it all up on there real good, even down here on these sides like this right here. Let's show you what that looks like. All right, so we got that nice and muddy, and this is a good example of what it might look like on a construction zone like this. Now, I've got other tools that I've got muddier than this back here working in this area. So get it muddy, what do you want to do? You want to clean it off, right? And we have it all up in there. I mean, I pushed it up into the sides and up into that side and got it all over it. So this is not just something I dumped on it and there's no mud on it. This is actually muddy. So let's clean it off. And you can see that it's setting in the mud, so the bottom is getting muddy as I clean the top. I'm just trying to give a good example of what IP65 rating means on these power stations. And Bluetti is the first, if not the only one that I know of that offers this type of protection from the weather. Now I'm going to take it back up here, lay it on its side, and clean that bottom off. We take a look down in here, you'll see flanges, right? So that is the back side of the inverter where it cools off. So it passes air over top of that. But on this other side, I'm not sure how they do it, but the fan is right here that's pulling the air through, and it keeps everything cool when it's running. So this has to be waterproof also, because that's the only electrical component that I can see down through those vents. And you can spray this with water, because that water pressure that's coming out of that hose is pretty intense for this rating. We could probably got 100 PSI coming out of that hose, because it doesn't have a reducer in pressure on it. It's straight from the curb. And I mean, everything works fine on these units. So let's just turn this back on. We're at 91%. I'm gonna get this plugged in and test out the inverter. And this right here is a pretty big test for such a small power station, but it is 600 watts, and I think this thing runs around 630 watts or something like that. So let's plug it in, see what happens. So 707 watts. This might not last very long, but it's definitely going over the wattage. Now you can turn the mode on, the power lift mode for this, and it would work great. I wouldn't recommend turning it on for other appliances, but being that this is a heating element and it doesn't have a big conductive load that's coming like a motor, then I think you'll be able to turn this on and it would last longer. But I'm gonna actually see how long this will run this at 700 watts, even though this is rated at 600 watts. That's pretty awesome. I thought that would be kicking off by now. Oh, there it is, overload. So this can run up over 600 watts for a little bit of time, but you will get the overload error that lets you know you shouldn't be running it like that, because the inverter's not made to go 700 watts. It's made for 600 watts. And on all the Bluetti power stations that I've used, the way that you would reset the overload is you hold in the power button, turn it completely off, and turn it back on, and everything will be reset. So that's crazy that it only runs at 580 watts on power lift mode, but when you take it off power lift mode, it goes to 700 watts. Whatever, however that's working is completely fine with me, because it will power this now through probably 0% without kicking off. The main point here is that this can run a cooker like this. Now, being that we got a around 400 watt capacity on the battery, it's not going to run it for very long, but it can do the output of over 600 watts on this in power lift mode. And out of power lift mode, it could do 700 watts for, what was it, probably a minute and a half. And everything's going to work fine for you. If you needed more capacity, you can always expand it with the expandable batteries. And this power station is super quiet. When I stop talking, look at the number that's on the sound meter, and it's going to be right around 35 to 38 decibels. Let's get this unplugged. Let's put in our watt meter and plug in our little cooker and do a capacity test on the 400 watt hours and see what type of efficiency we get. And we're drawing right at 600 watts, which is the max for this inverter. And I'm going to do that the entire time. So that could bring the efficiency number down just a little bit, but I think that this is a way that most people would use it. I know that that's not standard laboratory test style, but I'm trying to do more real life testing on this to kind of give you an idea if you were using it under this type of scenario. Right at 600 watts, we're going to pull down to 0. We're going to find out what the efficiency is. And to do that, I just got to come over here and change this function. We want this number right here to be as close to 400 watt hours as possible, or 404 watt hours as possible. 321 watt hours at 53 minutes. And I must admit that I'm a little bit underwhelmed on the efficiency coming in right at 79 to 80%. However, I did something you should not do when testing efficiency, and that was discharging this at 600 watts on a 600 watt continuous inverter from 100% down to 0%. I even overheated the power station to where it would not charge back. So a lot of that efficiency could probably rise up at several percent from that 80% range, probably up to 82 to 85%, and definitely be within the industry standard. But I wanted to kind of do this in a different manner to bring you a different style of test and see what would happen. And this is what happened. And I overloaded the power station to where it would not charge back. Let me show you what that looked like. I'm not sure if you've seen this anywhere before, as I've never seen this on a review where we have the temperature flashing. So what I'm going to do is just hold off on charging this until this cools down and see if we can get this reset to where it's not doing that. Now, that's on me because I knew that I should not be doing 600 watts from 100% down to 0%, because once you reach that 5 to 10%, you should start reducing your output, especially at 600 watts down to 0. But I wanted to see what would happen by doing that, and this is exactly what happened. That's why I do these tests, because I'm capable of testing these things out in scenarios that we should not be doing to see what would happen if we do them. So let's see if this will cool down and start back up. What we're seeing from the thermal camera here is the external temperature of the plastic. This is not the internal temperature of the components on the inside. So this makes total sense to me while the power station has shut down due to temperature inside, because remember, this is a concealed component that is IP65 rated, so we can't even see anything on the internal temperature, and we're getting some decent readings out of this and see that the box is heated up. So it does make total sense that I have overheated it to see what would happen by going from 100% to 0% of using 600 watts the entire time, all the way down to 0%. So we'll see if this cools down in this air conditioned space that I'm in, and when it does, we'll get back up and running. All right, so we got it to charge back up. It took it about 5 minutes to get cooled off enough to start charging. So good that it didn't damage it, and it has those safety precautions in place. I've never seen that happen before on a power station, although we all know that we shouldn't do that type of testing to do a max from the 100% state all the way down to 0% state. But it's good that it didn't damage itself, or I didn't destroy it. So you can do it. I wouldn't recommend it. Because we're below the 5 or 10% state of charge, this is only going to charge around the 140 watts of input early on. But once it reaches past that, we don't want to damage the battery by charging too fast at a low state of charge. So once it gets up past that, no matter what setting you have this on, whether you got it on standard, turbo, or silent, it's going to be around 140 watts to start it back up. So for me, this is a little surprising. It's already jumped to 188 watts of input at 2%. So it bumped up to around 235, 240 watts at 4%. We're getting very close to the max input of the standard charge at 4%. And once we reached 11%, we went into 300 and I think it's 350 watts. Then got to 12%. We were doing this here. So I'm guessing this is going to bump up to 550 watts in just a couple moments here, especially after the 15% range. But it'll go to 550, come back down to 350, and probably stay within that range. That's kind of what was happening when we were at 65% charge when I was testing this before. But it did start to bump up the actual input after 11%. I do want to discuss the different charging modes on the AC60. If we look up here in the right hand corner at the top, the little gear, you tap that, you'll come down to the charging modes in the center of the screen there, and we'll see that it has a standard, a turbo, and a silent charging mode. We're currently on turbo, so let's switch it over to silent. We'll go back. It should drop down around 240, 250 watts of grid power coming in on AC. If we go to the turbo mode and set it, that will bump back up to around 450, 470 watts, but it does go anywhere from 350 to 550 watts, I've noticed. If we go back into the silent mode and we hit OK, then that's going to drop down to around the 150, 160 watts, and you can't even hear it charge. But I like charging on the standard mode, but if I'm trying to really charge up as fast as possible, I'll use the turbo mode. There is one thing that annoys me about the AC60, and that's the screen that automatically turns off after about 30 to 45 seconds. That could be fixed with a firmware update, I do believe, because if you look behind me here, every one of those bigger boxes have an option in the app to make the screens never turn off. So you can turn them off after like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it is, but there's an option to never turn off. There's not an option for the AC60 to have this screen to never turn off. I would like for this screen to stay on while I'm using it, so that way I can just see it visually and be able to figure things out. I don't want to have to log into the app or press a button to see the state of charge. And you'll see it's already turned off. And I don't like that. You have to come back in here and hit the power button real quick to turn it back on. That shouldn't happen. We don't have that problem with the AC200L, the AC240, or the AC500 on any of those boxes, because we have the option to have that screen to turn on forever. We need that option in the AC60 as well. I hope that Bluetti is listening and we can get that update on a firmware sometime in the future, because I've read throughout the internet, a lot of people are wanting that. With that said, this is still the best small power station that I've tested. It's got the IP65 rating. It's got a 600 watt output, although it's only got a 400 watt hour battery capacity. It is expandable, which is something that's hard to find on these smaller portable power stations. And overall, this is probably my favorite small portable power station that I've tested to date.